Hey, it's KP coming to you live from Corona, California. We are back here for our third episode. It is Election Day, Super Tuesday. We're going to talk about why elections matter as it relates to fiscal policy. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence, how it's very similar in voting and politics as it is with investing and managing your money. And then we'll get into a recap of some of the actual news that came out since our last taping. The Fed hath spoken. Jobs report came out. We have a huge inflation report coming out later this week. By the way, if you like what I'm talking about, be sure to subscribe down below on the link and bang that like button. It'll get more people this information, which I hope provides value to you and your family. Okay, why do elections matter to you and I? It's very, very simple. It's fiscal policy. What the government sets on their agenda affects our pocketbook, and most people vote their pocketbook. You ever hear that saying, it's the economy, stupid? That's what people vote. Gas prices, rent prices, home prices, food prices, jobs. Are they gainfully employed? How are they feeling? Do they feel wealthy? Do they feel like things are good? Are they on edge? Everybody votes their pocketbook. Elections matter. When we talk about fiscal policy, it is different than what we talked about last week, which is monetary policy. Monetary policy is set by the Federal Reserve, the Fed, and the Treasury. But fiscal policy is set by our elected officials, the people who represent us in this great democracy. We're very fortunate to be in this country and blessed to be able to vote for those who represent us. Politics, ugly game. I'm not a fan, and I'm gonna try and teach you how to deal with it, because that emotional intelligence it takes to deal with politics is the same that it takes to deal with your money and your financial well-being. So let's get into what Congress is setting, why it matters to us. The really big stuff that matters is regulation. Is there over-regulation? Is there regulation on things that affect what we buy? Housing? You may not know this, but the way that credit scores are modeled and the way lenders, like the company that I'm part owner of, we have to view people's credit profile, that is changing over the next 2 years. That's a recent regulatory change set by Director of the FHFA, Dr. Sandra Thompson, an amazing woman who had a chance to hear speak multiple times this year. They announced recently something that has to do with regulation, which will set the tone for how we operate and get houses, getting more credit out there for more inclusive credit who may have a low to moderate income. If they are underrepresented in their credit profile, then now with this new scoring model that's coming out over the next couple of years, that will make it just a little bit more attainable for home ownership. Now, why does that matter when it comes to politics and the election? Because the administration appointed her, Dr. Thompson, and she and her team helped set that regulation. I'll give you another example. There's a debt ceiling vote that's coming up here soon. So our budget that is set by our government, by Congress, there's a whole process where budget plans are laid out in the House and the Senate, and they ultimately vote and try and pass. Debt is what makes the world go round. This world is based on credit. Now, I may have said this before, and I want to just reiterate it. There's about, let's call it $3 trillion in cash in the world, but there's a total of $50 trillion in credit. If you are lent money, if you borrow money, it gives you the ability to buy a home, to buy a car. All of that borrowing, all of that lending, all of that credit matters. So when the government, when Congress is passing a budget and they are deciding whether to raise the debt ceiling, how much debt can our country get into? That affects credit everywhere. So fiscal policy, which is set by our government, our elected officials that we elect on Election Day, on Super Tuesday, like today, it matters for the flow of credit throughout the world and especially into our pocketbooks here in America. So what are some other examples of fiscal policy that impact the way you and I operate every day? This year, the president made a strategic decision to use our strategic petroleum oil reserve, the strategic reserve in America. Gas prices were getting high because supply chains were constrained coming out of COVID because of monetary policy from the Fed affecting higher gas prices, more dollars in the system, more credit out there, more liquidity, chasing less and less goods, which included gas. And that affected everybody. Mobility is huge. He made a strategic decision to use those reserves, our reserves, and basically pump out like 1 million barrels a day extra out of the petroleum reserve to bring down gas prices. And that helps affect our pocketbook. So again, fiscal policy is set, and it matters who you vote for. I'm not advocating who to vote for. I'm just saying examples of how these things work. And to be fair, both parties achieve actual results at times. And so I know that politics, which we'll get into in a little bit, is a very ugly game. But at the end of the day, these politicians, these elected officials that we vote in, they do set fiscal policy, and it does matter for us. Okay, let's talk about what it takes from a mindset standpoint. If you want to vote and use emotion, you want to make a financial decision, you want to sell a stock when the market's very volatile, all these things require emotional intelligence. EQ, I think EQ stands for your emotional quotient. I've seen it as emotional intelligence. The ability to keep your emotions in check or use your emotions and set them aside to be able to use wisdom to make decisions. Politics is an ugly game. I personally don't watch the news that often. I like to see clips from financial channels because I like to see what's going on in the money markets. But what I've found in my brief 46 years of existence on this earth is that the way mainstream media is set up is very similar to how our political system is set up. There are only two parties, really. I know there's typically a third party candidate out there, and I wish that they had a stronger voice. But the way that the media is set up, it is basically there to make sure that our emotions are preyed upon, especially during election year. You know, if I'm watching my favorite sports team, you know, I get emotional when I watch my sports team, and I say and I yell things at the TV, and I try and keep that in check. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. That's not going to hurt my family. That's not going to hurt my pocketbook. But if I get my emotions played with in watching political ads, in watching political parties say this or this about one or the other, facts, data, science, and math tend to get lost. And that same emotional intelligence, that ability to stay away from that and not have your emotions played with, is also important in making financial decisions. If you're watching your 401k, or you're watching an account, or you're watching a stock account or investment account, and you're seeing the stock market go down quite a bit, and you're hearing in the news all the time, recession, 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 oh my gosh, the world is ending. What might you do? You might say, you know what, I've had enough, I need to protect my money, I'm about to retire, I can't afford to lose this money, I need this money to live on my fixed income budget, I'm gonna sell. Then you've locked in your loss. But remember, things like stocks, they go up and down, just like emotions. And they are a reflection of human nature. And so you have to sit back and take a deep breath and go, what is best for me and my long-term vision and my family? Stocks go up, they go down. You sell an equity, you sell a home, you are locking in that price. You may have made money or you may have lost money. But all I'm advocating for is to make sound financial decisions, just like we make sound electoral decisions, and try to keep your emotions in check, to separate what gets you fired up. It's okay to be passionate about causes. I'm not saying that. But remember, politicians come and go. We are still here trying to provide food and wealth for our families and ourselves. So let's take EQ into mind, and let's try and hold our emotions in check when we make these decisions, and then we'll live with these decisions. Speaking of living with these decisions, let's talk about some of the decisions that were made last week, some decisions in the news which do impact us. So the Fed came out last week. It's very interesting. They raised the federal funds rate, which is the rate that banks lend to each other, the overnight federal funds rate, by 75 basis points. That was actually expected. The market expected a 75 basis point rate hike. That is the fourth one in a row at 75 basis points. Those are big moves. From where they started earlier this year, they have gone up 16 times on raising that federal funds rate. That's a lot of medicine in the system to try and tackle inflation. So the Fed came out, and in their statement, what they specifically said, and this is important because the statement is written in stone. The statement said, basically, that the Federal Reserve is going to take in consideration the aggregate effect, basically, of all the raises and any lags that may occur. Now, if you just pause right there, that word aggregate and the word lag, the way it was interpreted by all the smart money And you could tell because the stock market started going up right away when the statement was released. You would think it wouldn't go that way, right? 75 basis point rate hike, but the statement was what was unexpected. And what they were saying was, you know what? We've had 4 75 basis point rate hikes. We think that in aggregate will do a job on this economy where it will start to bring demand down, start to work and bring inflation down. Right now, inflation is still at a very multi-decade high. The Fed recognizes they've done 4 75 basis point rate hikes, and they know that they are going to have an effect on credit. Then the press has about 18 minutes with Federal Chairman Jerome Powell, and all the questions and the way he was answering was basically interpreted as hawkish. So there's hawkish and dovish. The statement was dovish. It basically said, all right, I think we're getting closer to the end of raising rates, so we see some light at the end of the tunnel. So the doves, okay, you know what? They're going to be less harsh to us. But the hawkish tone, which is a word that's used out there, is, hey, we think inflation's a problem, and we think it's here for a while. He said, you know what? We think we're going to need these rates higher than originally thought, and they may be higher for longer than the market is thinking. So immediately the stock market reversed when he was doing his question and answer. So you can understand that specific meeting, how it fits into the way federal open market committee meetings operate, how they impact money. Now, what's interesting is then a couple days later, we had a jobs report. Now, remember, the Fed has a dual mandate in their monetary policy. It's not just fight inflation. They have to also make sure that the economy has maximum employment. The BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, puts out a monthly job report. The first Friday of every month, you see the prior month's job report come out. The jobs report has 2 components to it, right? There's some data and then there's a survey, okay? So the survey is literally 60,000 phone calls that are made, and people are asked, are you employed? Have you lost your job? Do you feel good? What is your income range, if you don't mind me asking? And that information is compiled and it takes time. So those calls weren't made on Thursday and the report goes out on Friday. So typically the data is collected for the October jobs report, for the second half of September going into the first half of October. So that jobs report said that there was a higher than expected number of jobs created. Over 260,000 jobs in a month were created. I think 210,000 was the anticipated number. At first, that jobs report was seen as, hey, the economy is still doing well. There are still jobs being created. That gives the Fed the green light to continue to fight inflation and continue to raise the federal funds rate, because the jobs part, their other part of their dual mandate, is doing just fine. Now, this is where we get really technical, so bear with me just a second. And you can always Google this and fact check me. I appreciate that. Put the comments down below. I don't get every number exactly right because I'm just shooting from the hip here. But basically, within that data and that reports, there was actually over 283,000 jobs lost in that month. Now, why did the net number come out at 260,000 plus net jobs gained? Because away from the survey component, the other component, there's a birth and death rate that goes on. And there was over 453,000 added people in the country because of birth and death rate ratio. And so it was a way to cover up the job losses of 283,000 to get you a net effect when all the components and everything was all measured together of 260,000 plus jobs created a month. That's how that data is compiled. So why did the bond market stay kind of stable after the jobs report? Because they looked into these details. These institutional analysts, these analysts on Wall Street, they didn't think that jobs report was as positive as the headline sounded. They saw that number of jobs lost down below. So we're all going to watch the next jobs report come out, and we're going to see whether there are more jobs lost. We read the headlines. We see, in my housing industry, there's been a lot of jobs lost, but that could be coming near an end if the Fed starts to hold back on their monetary policy and the fact they might stop raising rates as aggressively or even pause. It's not a direct correlation to interest rates, but it does have an impact to interest rates. All right, let's talk about CPI and inflation. They are looking at this CPI number that's coming out on Thursday. It is the Consumer Price Index. We've talked about this on our first video, one of many inflation indicators, but a very important one. The price of goods that consumers pay. So the CPI is an index. There are 12 monthly data points throughout the year, okay? So right now we have a 6.6%. That is made up of 12 different monthly reads added together. And the October 21 read, last October's number, was 0.6%, 0.6%. So 6.6 is all the numbers added together, right? And including last October's 0.6. So we're gonna take out last October of 21's 0.6%, which would bring us down to 6. And then we're gonna add back October of 22 number, and who knows what that will be until Thursday. The estimates are 0.5%. So it's only coming down 0.1%, 1/10%. That would mean that the overall number would go from 6.6 to 6.5%. So let's just pause right there. That's the estimate of what we think is going to come out. Now, 6.5% is still very elevated inflation. It is higher than the federal funds rate, is higher than the cost of money. We don't know where their target rate will ultimately end. There are bets out there where it's going to end, but I can tell you where it's going to end has a lot to do with inflation. If inflation comes down by 0.1%, okay, it still has come down. But then the other side of that argument is it hasn't come down enough because we're still at 6.6 overall. Maybe the number that comes out on Thursday is lower than the 0.5 estimated number. Maybe it's like the last couple months. We had a 0.3, a 0.2, and a 0.3 rise. Maybe it's only 0.3. So the headline number could go from 6.6 to 6.3. We don't know. We'll find out Thursday. But if inflation and prices that go into that index are starting to come down, the prices of used cars are coming down. The price of money for homes has gone up. The price of homes has gone up through May, but since May, home prices have started to come down. It brings these indices data points coming down and the overall number coming down. And at some point, the Fed and the markets and everyone watching will say inflation is coming down or has come down or it's at an acceptable level. We have enough medicine in the system. We don't have to keep raising the Fed funds rate. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And every day that goes by, every data point that comes out, every inflation read, jobs read, every single piece of data that comes out helps us course correct and see where the economy is going, to see where interest rates are going. If you like this information, be sure to bang that like button down below. Make sure you subscribe. We'll get another video out next week. Thank you for joining me today. Look forward to the next one. Have a great week. Cheers.